a Playlist original.
Does it not bother you that everybody in this school thinks that you're a piranha? Like I give a shit. They all want me as a friend or a fuck.
You blow it tonight, girl, and it's keggers with kids all next year. I'll tell everyone about tonight.
Heather Chandler is one bitch that deserves to die.
Killing her won't solve anything.
I'm a no-rust build-up man myself.
Be a dick. I just killed my best friend.
This were like a suicide thing, you know? Hey, you can do Heather's handwriting as well as your own, right?
I must say I was impressed to see that she made proper use of the word myriad in her suicide note.
What was the first day after Heather's suicide like?
Just so unfair.
Sorry to hear about your friend. Thought she was your usual airhead bitch.
I prayed for the death of Heather Chandler many times. And I felt bad every time I did it, but I kept doing it anyway. Now I know you understood everything. Praise Jesus. Hallelujah.
I've cut off Heather Chandler's head, and Heather Duke's head is sprouted back in its place.
Suicide is a private thing.
Are we going to prom or to hell?
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Back to the Blockbuster with your host Kiss and Jackson, recording on a Sunday evening. Actually, you know what's interesting? I think we did a Sunday recording back when you were first starting on the show. I think it was like, I think we had to do like, it was like Oscar predictions or something that we had to get out before the Monday.
That's right.
So that was like way early in your run. But anything to accommodate our ever fluctuating schedules to get these done. So
I love a Sunday because it's almost like a guaranteed movie day for me, because it's like, you know, it's the day of rest and I usually spend my Sundays watching something. So the watch for today is fresh in my mind. It was also a recent rewatch. So it's just great to not have to like put a day in between the actual watch versus the recording of the episode. So yeah, very happy that it worked out in our favor. We got a really busy week recording tomorrow too with another anniversary episode. And I know you've been keeping track. What what number anniversary episode is Heather's today?
I think we're on 7 now.
Okay, we're on a good,
which is good. I mean, I think we mentioned on an episode that dropped before that last year we did 31 anniversary episodes. Which
so we're actually behind pace right now. We gotta crank those numbers up. If we do 2 a month,
I know
that's the pace we're at right now. We gotta get okay. We have a lot lined up though, so I think we might be all right.
We do. And I think as it, once it'll be harder to like maybe avoid like, all right, man, maybe we'll just suck it up and crank in 3 if we really want to do that extra one. But there's so many for this year that I think like everyone that listens to it, I think we're going to top 31. So I think
they have high hopes for us.
They do have high hopes. And today we are celebrating a 35th anniversary. Interesting too, because we've been doing a lot of teen movies from like my era as anniversaries from like 1998 1999 but it is cool to go back to one from 1989 during a completely different era for the teen film, looking back at Heather's, a 1989 black comedy film, very 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 dark satire comedic teen film, written by Daniel Waters, and a fun connection because his brother is Mark Waters, who directed Mean Girls.
I just found that out today.
Yeah, me too. I looked it up right before. I was like, whoa, I did not realize that was the case. So like a nice little connection there, because a lot of people, critics, audience people that have seen the movie think that Mean Girls was heavily influenced by Heather's. And I think after rewatching it for this and being,
that's very much apparent.
Seen Mean Girls so many times where it's like, it's very much in its DNA for sure.
That's the inspiration behind like my light today color. My lamp color is pink because of the connection to Mean Girls. That's kind of why I decided to make it that color today, because of that connection. But I did not know actually about Mark and is it Dave?
Daniel.
Mark and Dan. Yeah, I did not know about the connection between those movies, at least with the brothers there being involved in both. So that was kind of fun to see. But of course, definitely associate these movies together after seeing Heather's for the first time last year. Very clear. At least there's even some scenes that seem beat for beat very similar.
Similar. Yeah.
is awesome. But yeah, lots of actually watching some videos since, there was quite a few other properties that seem to, if not being directly inspired by Heathers, definitely borrowed a little bit of the formula for sure. Riverdale was an interesting one that some people had mentioned, but I guess there's some characters in Heathers that had the same names as the Archie comics too, which I think predate Heathers.
Yeah.
So I think it got some influence too.
Definitely. And, you know, the movie is significant for a lot of reasons. I think because, you know, by the time Heathers comes out in 1989, that era of the teen film in the 80s was kind of coming to a close, basically.
It was the golden era of that genre of film for sure, right? Wrapping up near the end of the decade, 100%.
Right. And a lot of those movies were popularized by John Hughes, who did like Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Breakfast Club, 16 Candles.
This is the anti-John Hughes movie, is it not?
And it is. And Daniel Waters really said that he wanted to write kind of the anti-John Hughes movie. And you know, it's interesting too that it comes out around this time. And because I did mention this when we did Bill and Ted, but like there was a comment when we did Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, because that came out in 89 as well.
Yeah.
But it also filmed early because they had to shelve it because like the studio was on that almost went bankrupt and they had to find a new home for it. But one reviewer made a comment that they were surprised that Bill and Ted, when it came out at the time, that it did so well because these films were kind of trailing off at the box office and they weren't as significant as they once were in the early 80s, mid 80s. And even though, oddly enough, I didn't know this until doing research for today, Heathers was not a box office success when it came out in 89. It kind of it flopped actually when it came out in 89. It had a $3 million budget and only made $1.1 million. But
wow.
I think the problem was the studio behind it. They were also going bankrupt. And I think by the time, I think it's like New World was the one that released it. New World Pictures. And by the time it came time to release it, there was just no money to really promote the movie. Now they did their best to put it out that like, they knew they had something special because it premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January of 1989. And movies like this really weren't pushed at those kind of festivals. So they knew that they had something really unique. And it did win the Independent Spirit Award for Best First Feature. Nice. And then Waters received the Edgar Award for Best Motion Picture Screenplay. It was really well received by critics, even more so retroactively. There were some critics at the time that found it kind of very dark, and the subject matter of using teen suicide as a plot device for humor was also kind of not seen very highly by a lot of critics. But this is another great glowing example of a movie that truly took off and became a cult classic once it came out on home video, and became very, very huge after that. Like we said, it was the inspiration for Mean Girls. And there's another movie that came out in 1999 called Jawbreaker. I did a deep dive with.
I saw that. I'm not familiar with that movie at all, so I didn't really realize the connections.
Yeah, I did a deep dive with movies with Mr. Mario for Jawbreaker. Because it was one of those movies that had a 25th anniversary in February. We had a packed schedule already. I didn't want to throw it in there, but I was like, it's
worth covering.
And so we were able to do a deep dive on it, and in similar fashion to Heathers. Now the thing is, Jawbreaker did not get good reviews from critics when it came out, but in a similar fashion, it flopped like Heathers.
Okay.
But Jawbreaker has a huge cult following now. It became huge when it came out on home video, and that Daniel Stein, who wrote and directed it, said that he really wanted to make a Heathers for his generation, which is why Jawbreaker is very mean-spirited. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of like, there is some redemption and some like, oh, there's the message, but it's very like little.
Okay.
It kind of embraces how dark it is and doesn't let go of that, which is a lot of people, at the time when Jawbreaker came out, they're like, it feels like almost a ripoff of Heathers, especially because it does involve like, murder and all that stuff too. But I think in the years since, they've seen like the differences in those movies, and they've kind of have their own place in, their respective like pop culture.
It's a fine line you got to walk as a filmmaker when you want to, pay homage to a movie that you're inspired by without directly copying it, even if you're using a different setting or anything.
Yeah.
So, the ones that are able to pull that off slickly, those are the ones, that go down in history. But I know it's hard. I couldn't imagine like where you draw those lines. I got to see Jawbreaker though. I've literally did not know anything about it. But if it's anything in the vein of Heathers, definitely worth checking out. This movie is a lot of fun.
It's really fun, and kudos to Mark J. Parker, who he's been on the show a lot. You guys know he's the host of the Release Date Rewind podcast. He actually had the director of Jawbreaker on his podcast to talk about it for his 25th anniversary, and learned a lot about the movie through that too. And they talked about the Heathers connection as well when they spoke about Jawbreaker, and it was really one of those things where he actually said, it was similar to what you said. It is a fine line when you're trying to like pay homage or if you're inspired by a certain movie. When you watch Jawbreaker, you see the similarities, but it's also its own entirely different beast too. So it's not exactly. I would never call it a ripoff of Heathers, but it definitely kind of took that cue of like, hey, let's like flip the whole like wholesome part of high school and look at the darker parts of high school and make fun of it. And that is, I respect satire. I think that's why a lot of Heathers works, because there is, we've talked a lot about these teen movies that use certain derogatory terms and all that stuff, and in the films at that time, and we're like, hey, it feels like it wouldn't fly today. It feels like it, really a product of its time. Right. I think they get away with it a lot in Heathers because this is clearly satire, and there's not, even though it might come off mean-spirited, it's poking fun at it rather than just throwing it around. Yeah, throwing it around just for
you got to be in on it to really notice the difference between the mean-spirited dialogue in a lot of moments in this movie and knowing that it's making fun of these archetypes and tropes that of people that would speak this way and how it's presented in across other media. But that's what I love, a good parody or satire that works as good as like a movie like Heathers does is the kind of comedy that I really like steer to, because it's you're right, it's really the term black comedy that applies to this. That's the only way that you really, I think, it could pass as any sort of comedy, because like the nature of it is so dark, but there are some laugh out loud moments that if somebody didn't know the context and you were just to read some of these lines, they might think you're a psycho for laughing at it, but it just comes across so funny in the movie.
Yeah, definitely. And for those that don't know, the movie stars Winona Ryder. She had already been in Beetlejuice at this point, but this is another big breakout role for her. Christian Slater had been in the movie before this, but this is considered his breakout role too. Shannen Doherty, who plays one of the Heathers, she would go on to be on Beverly Hills 90210. She was on Charmed. She had a pretty big career on TV as well. And then Lisanne Falk, Kim Walker, and Penelope Milford. The plot portrays 4 teenage girls, 3 of whom are named Heather, in a clique at an Ohio high school, one of whose lives is disrupted by the arrival of a misanthrope intent on murdering the popular students and staging their deaths as suicides. Waters wrote Heathers as a spec script and originally wanted Stanley Kubrick to direct the film out of admiration for Kubrick's own black comedy film, Dr. Strangelove. Waters intended the film to contrast the optimistic teen movies of the era, particularly those written by John Hughes, by presenting a cynical depiction of high school imbued with dark satire. So you said that you've seen it before, but this fairly recently. But what were your thoughts on it that you can remember when you first watched it, and what are your thoughts on it now?
So this is a movie I got I didn't buy it for myself, but I gifted a physical copy to Cam. Like for those that don't know, like one of my long-term best friends, my movie watching partner. And I think it was his birthday or Christmas. And I saw a copy of this, and like, for whatever reason at the time that I picked it up, it was floating around in some circles, and it was on a list of mine to look out for. And I saw it. I remember the case of the DVD is black, and like the word Heathers on the side of the spine is like very contrasted in like a dark shade of pink. So like I saw it immediately. I was like, oh, that's a snag. So I picked it up. And then a few months later, we ended up watching it together. And I was like, kind of knew that it was like a little bit of the broad strokes of the plot, and that it had been noted as inspiring Mean Girls. And honestly, beyond that, didn't know much. So went in, had a great time with it. Really did not expect that movie it does not pull its punches like I thought a late 80s movie might, in terms of like, some of the subject matter and just the horrendous lines that are thrown around at this movie. I didn't expect that from a movie from this era. So I remember being quite like impressed that the screenplay really got away with as much as it did. There's some things in there that definitely lock this movie as being like a product of the 80s, but not to a detriment. In that way, I do feel very much like this movie would not go down the way that it does in this one. And if you were to remake it for the modern era, it definitely feels like a product of its time in that regard. But it was so much fun. By the time it progressively kind of gets more outlandish as you go, we find out JD's kind of like master plan. But I thought that was a lot of fun. There's some 80s cheese in there to love. There's a few things probably that I could nitpick at it, but like for the sake of it, not even really worth. Like it was a watch I definitely anticipate seeing again in the future. Today was no different. Probably was only I can't exactly pinpoint it. This is exactly why I'm happy that I started logging my watches on Letterboxd, because now I'll be able to go back and like actually find out when I'd last seen something. But it was probably, if I were to guess, like maybe like 7 or 8 months ago that I'd seen it for the first time. So yeah, but a really great watch. Today it held up. Watched it by myself. It was a breeze. It flies by at an hour and 43 minutes. So doesn't overstay its welcome. Winona Ryder and Christian Slater. I know more Christian Slater roles than I would Winona Ryder, but Winona's great in this. The only thing I've seen in her recently was Stranger Things, and that's, she's one of many characters in that show, but she really shines. I thought she was fantastic. Christian Slater's always likable, like no matter what kind of character he's playing. He's one of those like sneaky favorite actors of mine. So to see him in this was great too. And the whole cast all around thought was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. But you said offline, this is like basically I know it wasn't your first time watching it, but it had been so long. You said it was kind of like a first time watch again. So what did you think after wrap? Did you watch it today? I guess I should.
Yeah, I watched it today.
Nice.
Yeah,
okay.
It was actually when you like said like this 5:30 work today. I was like, perfect. I was still in the middle of watching, and I was like, I'm sure it'll be over by then, because I when I start something, I don't necessarily look at like how long it is until it's over. Right. And then I got hit pause like right when you said that, and I was like, all right, that gives me more time to finish it. So it's like fresh in my mind now, which is good. But yeah, like I told you, I had seen it before, but it had been a very long time, like very, very long time.
Do you know when you think it would have been that you'd seen it for the first time?
You know what? I probably was like 20. So a very long time. Felt like a long time ago.
Okay.
And I didn't remember a lot of it. So watching it now, it felt like I was watching it for the first time. There were like certain things I kind of remembered, like dialogue wise. The one that stood out the most was "fuck me gently with a chainsaw." I didn't remember that. And but I love movies like this that are like, the script is very smart and witty. I love very snarky sense of humor, and like this has that in spades pretty much. And I also was impressed by, like you said, with Christian Slater and Winona Ryder, but the whole cast is really, you could tell, committed. Like they knew exactly, except for, you know what, she's committed in the movie, but then I read later about Shannen Doherty that she quite did not understand the intention of the film, apparently, according to
she plays Heather Duke, is that right? The one that replaces Heather Chandler, right?
Apparently, she didn't realize that this was a dark comedy. She thought she was making a drama, and and so, but in the movie, you don't gather that she is like, detached from the material. Like she's also has some moments that are really good. But overall, it's thinking about Winona Ryder. So she was, I think they said 16 or 17 when she did this, or when she came in to do it.
I meant to look that up and I didn't. So glad that you brought that up, because I was going to check. I would not have placed her as that young though.
No, me either. And that was part of the reason why they didn't want her at first. Yeah, they looked at Justine Bateman and Jennifer Connelly back in the day. And she really wanted the part, but she had done Beetlejuice, and she said that she still looked like that part. Like she looked like Lydia, like kind of goth, very not like they needed her to look for the movie. And they're like, no, you're not right. You're not pretty enough, is what the writer and director said.
Whoa.
And she was like, she kind of got it because she didn't look the part. She was like, she looked like more like maybe someone the Heathers would make fun of, rather than like part of the group. So she, like, they I guess she said they took her to the Macy's and the Beverly Center, and they gave her a makeover, and she came back, and they're like, all right, she looks the part now. Now her agent didn't want her to do it because they're reading the script, and they were like, this is not it.
Yeah.
and she because they said they would ruin her career, and she said she got down on her knees and begged to her agent to let her take it, and then she ultimately did, and I guess that worked out in the long run.
The rest is history.
Yeah, Winona Ryder, I know you said you aren't really familiar with a lot of her stuff, but she was huge late 80s through mid 90s. Like she, Beetlejuice,
Beetlejuice, of course, the obvious one for sure.
I think Edward Scissorhands came out a year after this, so 1990.
Yep, you're right. There's another one.
She's in Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like she is in a lot of stuff like during that time period. And then she had the whole like shoplifting scandal, and then she kind of went away for a little bit, and then she became like a really big like Hollywood comeback story when she got Stranger Things, and that.
Who's she married to?
I don't know. Now she did date Johnny Depp back in the day. They're not together anymore.
Right. I think that might have been who I was thinking of, actually.
Yeah, she is married to someone named Scott McKinley Hahn. I don't know if he's anyone in the industry, but she was actually with Johnny Depp from 1989 to 1983. So around the time this movie came out is when that started.
83 to 89?
No, 89 to 93.
To 93, okay. Was she ever with Keanu Reeves, or am I just thinking that because of Dracula?
I think just because of Dracula.
Because I have seen her in that. I did see that a couple of years ago for the first time, which was great. But maybe I was thinking that they had been dating. But I think you're right. I think it was Johnny Depp that I was thinking that she had been with. But yeah, most of those properties you just named were the performances of hers I've seen, and I've always enjoyed her. She is great. I'm crazy that she pulled off this role at that young age. Were her co-stars older than her? Were they all the same age?
What I read is that some of her co-stars were around the same age. Like Shannen Doherty was a little bit older than her, like 18. And then Lisanne Falk, who plays, and that's gonna be like, I'm trying to get all the like Heathers right. She is Heather McNamara, so the other blonde, not the one that dies first. She was 23, so she was the oldest, and she lied about her age to so she would appear. And they didn't find out about her real age until production started. So they're like, "Oh, she's already here, so can't get rid of her."
That's not the first time I've heard about that happening in Hollywood, and I just would have guessed that there'd be more standardized hiring process where you like provide documents of this stuff.
You're gonna learn about this a little bit more too tomorrow, because Gabrielle Union, she was in She's All That in 1999 and 10 Things I Hate About You in 1999. We're covering that movie for its anniversary. She, on both movies, lied about her age. She was 28 when she did both of those movies, and she lied and said she was much younger, and they didn't really look into it until she was already cast. And they're like, well, she's here.
Okay.
And Gabrielle Union still looks stunningly beautiful, and she looks young still. And she looked the part of a teenager then, so they were like, it didn't really matter that she was far removed from being in high school. But yeah, there are examples of that. Another big one is Mila Kunis for that 70s show. She lied about her age. She was 14 or 15 when she got cast and said she was much older.
Oh my goodness.
And they didn't find out. They didn't find out until they already started the show. So it is interesting. Like, any normal job does standard background checks to find out things about you. And like,
why would this be any different, right?
Right.
Strange.
And Christian Slater, I'm glad you said that he is a sneaky good.
I love Christian Slater,
man, because he has the look, like he has the look of a like Hollywood like leading man, but like he was pretty popular, late 80s through pretty much the same time period as Winona Ryder.
They took off like definitely 90s and onwards for sure.
And he's definitely been in some stuff that you like. True Romance is a good example.
I love that performance.
He was in a few blockbuster movies like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. He's in Interview with the Vampire. He's been in a lot of big movies, but I always felt that like for someone who had that much talent and who looks the way that he looks, that he probably could have been even bigger than what he turned out to be.
He has an interesting career trajectory for sure. For whatever reason, just didn't rise to that superstardom that so many other of his like cohorts at the time would have. You're right, definitely was more low key, but always great in what he's in. Like picked great projects. I would like to. He'd be a great guy to like deep dive someday, because like he really just should have went for. But maybe that was like strategic. Maybe that's just not what he was after. Who knows?
Could be. And like in a similar fashion to Winona Ryder, like he didn't really have a lot scandal, but he was one of those another actors who later in his career he gets another big role. Like he was on iRobot? That was with Rami Malek. It was a TV show on the USA.
No. What is that?
No, Mr. Robot. Mr. Robot.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the
Will Smith movie.
Mr. Robot. He won a Golden Globe for that.
I did not even know he was in that show. Cam is always hyping that show up, and I've never seen it.
So he had a career resurgence after that, and after winning a Golden Globe, he was nominated for a Golden Globe 2 more years after that for the same role, and he has consistently worked. So it's not like he was has been and like never did anything. It's just interesting that he, when I look at stuff that he was in, especially early in his career, like I said, like he has the look to have done so much more.
The Hollywood bad boy look.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
he is also talented. It's not just a product
Right.
of like, oh, he's a good looking dude. He
He
actually
lives
has
up to it.
yes, he has the chops to back it up. And watching this, he has like, yeah, it's the whole like bad boy thing in this. It's also this little mix of like the epitome of cool is kind of in there too, where it's like he JD seems a little off, but it's like he also seems like I kind of want to be JD a little bit. You know, he seems like
Yeah.
he doesn't give two shits about anything, and that's cool. And that
He,
you know that
yeah, he very
yeah.
much. I don't know at what point. Well, I guess this came out just before David Lynch's Twin Peaks show, but there's a character in that show that is very much like JD, rides around on a motorcycle, black jacket, kind of like that cool bad boy in the town kind of character. And
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know if David Lynch was a fan of this movie when he was writing the character. I think that character's name is actually James as well, which is hilarious. Well, I know it's Jason Dean and Christian Slater's name, but still a J name.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd be curious to know if that was taken from Heather's, because if you ever see or watch Twin Peaks, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
It is nice. But yeah, he really exudes this character, and I think that's why the both of them work so well together, because Winona Ryder seems like she's going all in on her character too, and they have super good chemistry when they are.
I was about to say, I buy their chemistry, which you need to be successful co-leads. This is always a pairing that I really bought into.
And I kind of buy, and you also really buy how they kind of get sucked into this kind of very sick plan with each other, where it's she is feeling some kind of way about the the hierarchies of high school and what that all means, and we've all been there. We know what high school's like.
Exactly. So JD really, what I love about it, and there's a line in here that I thought was super slick. I wrote down just to bring up while we were talking about it, but there's several times where Winona's character Veronica is like journaling about how much she wishes the Heathers would die, or like they would be out of her life and school would be so much better without them. But it feels like JD really like puts her plan into action and goes farther than she ever really planned on going. And there's a great line after they, spoiler alert for those that maybe haven't seen it, when Heather Chandler, the first and arguably bitchiest Heather, bites the dust in the first like third of the movie. When they're kind of like coming up with a plan to stage her death as a suicide, Veronica mentions to JD or asks him, like, have you done this before? After he's like thinking of, quick things to do to like help cover it up. And it's interesting. Like the camera doesn't give him a chance to answer. The camera cuts and they go to the next scene before he gets a chance to either deny or come up with some quirky response. And I'm like, that just, even though it doesn't say anything, it just adds such a mystique to his character. And we do know that from his own dialogue that his family moved around across the country several times, and he's a very mysterious background. So interesting that kind of leaves that open to what else might he have been up to before he kind of lands in Ohio at the time this story happens. I just really like that detail in the screenplay. Was really slick. I
like that detail too, and I what I gathered from it, it was based on how methodical he is, that this isn't the first time he's
exactly.
Like
it's
this.
Like, and his
it's way too smart and way too well thought out, and
seems like second nature.
Right, like, so he is like, he really feels like the brain's running it, and kind of it's running on her emotions on why she wants to do it. And so these two those two things working together is how this succeeds. But like, it really is a lot, his brainchild, at least like getting it to work. And definitely. So I like that moment too, because I was like, he's definitely done this at other schools or somewhere else. I don't know. It's not his first rodeo by any means. But I actually was surprised, because like, so it's interesting, even though this is satire, and I read some reviews that were like, Heather's feels like they said it feels like a dream world kind of version of high school rather than a real version of high school,
which I think Mean Girls also encapsulates that feeling as well. Yeah, very much so.
But despite that being the case, I do agree with that comment, but I think there is still a lot of realism in its depictions of it, at least in the things that it pokes fun at about the high school experience. So,
the cliques, for sure. Cliques, as some people call it. I've always called them cliques, but I get that there's a multiple pronunciation, but they are so accurately portrayed in this movie. And I was also like, just like, like I'm looking at Heather's in there, and it's that whole initial setup in the cafeteria where they're kind of going around, like that whole, basically you're seeing who all your players are, who all the jocks are, and then I'm looking and I'm remembering Mean Girls, and Mean Girls has a similar kind of breakdown of
its cliques and as well. So like it's just seeing how like that and actually that moment has been done in a lot of high school movies since, where it's like, you know, like these are your jocks and these are your like, but you're learning about who these people are in different ways. But it's cool, so cool to see it's here. Like kind of feel like it was originated here.
It feels that way, and it makes total sense because the cafeteria is one of the few, if not the only place in a high school where generally all different types of students would all congregate in the same location, other than like the assembly or something. But the cafeteria is really where everyone is able to go and find their crowd and stay with them. And it's just, you can easily see who's who in the zoo, if you will.
Yeah.
So it's a great location. You're right. It feels like Heather's really started that trope in like teen high school movies.
And then I also am watching. Now it's interesting because like Mean Girls has an anniversary next month, and I think we're going to cover it.
I would love to. It would make sense. Yeah.
But I, you know, and it's something I will rewatch. But I've seen Mean Girls so many times that I it's in my brain. I know it, and it was hard not to. I'm watching this. I mean, still remembering Mean Girls as well. So like the whole like once like Heather Chandler's introduced, right? I was like, oh, that feels like Regina George. That feels like the Regina George of this movie.
Yeah.
And then one of the things I kept thinking about as that cafeteria scene was playing out, because like it really doesn't pull its punches. Like once the dialogue gets going, like you're like, oh, this is definitely dark. This is definitely not like a safe like high school movie.
No.
I kept thinking one of the complaints, and there's not a lot about Mean Girls, but a lot of people who compare it to Heather's feels that even though there is some mean-spiritedness and Mean Girls, it holds back a little bit compared to what Heather's does. Right. And I kept thinking about that. And I was wondering what you thought as far as, you know, the fact that Heather's doesn't pull any punches. Does that make it kind of a better representation of this kind of dark satire compared to me? Because even Mean Girls, even though there is, I don't want to say there's like a moral in Heather. I guess there is, but Mean Girls kind of has a bigger one by the end of it. You know, there's kind of like
a bigger what?
Bigger like moral at the end of the movie, like kind of like love who you are, kind of moral, and like, you know, when she like breaks like the homecoming like crown and like gives a piece to this person to that person. Right. There's more of like a message at the end of the movie.
I see what you're saying.
And it loses some of its like, you know, mean streak by the end. I was wondering if you thought that one is better than the other for, like, I think Heather's, because it doesn't do that. It's better in its own right because it doesn't quite go there.
I'd say I would counter that there's a little bit of that in Heather's at the end. It's definitely not as poignant as it is in Mean Girls. There's definitely a much bigger, flashier scene, like you said, when is it Kaylee? I can't remember her first name. Katie. Yeah. When she's breaking out the tiara and passing around. You're right. But there's a little bit of that, I think, at Heather's when Veronica approaches, and I'm gonna forget her name. Give me one moment here. Where is she in the cast? The character they're always making fun of.
The heavier.
Yeah, exactly. I just can't see her in the cast, so I'm forgetting her name. But she does approach her. Like the very last scene ends with them two, and she asks her. She's kind of the character that is like the butt of the jokes. Is like earlier in the movie she had like attempted suicide and was injured, and she's kind of driving through in her little scooter in the hallway, and Veronica asks her to kind of hang in on the day of the prom because they both didn't have dates, and just to hang out and have some girl time. And
Martha, by the way,
Martha, thank you very much. Yep, Martha. And then the camera kind of lingers on them as the credits are rolling, and they're just kind of continuing down the hallway. It felt kind of like she was breaking free from like the other, like the cliqueness and getting distancing herself from like who was left in the story at that point. But to answer your question like more thoroughly, I'd say I would give the edge to Heather's because it doesn't pull those punches, because it really leans into like, I think a big part would be like the offensive dialogue is just more of a genuine like realization of like how society really works in these cliques and in this setting. Where Mean Girls definitely has like a couple moments of some offensive dialogue by today's standards, but it doesn't have anything close to what I think Heather's has in several scenes. And I think that like I think both movies definitely work in what they're trying to do, but if I were to give the edge to one of them, I would say Heather's, because it just really doesn't pull any punches.
I agree.
Clear winner? Yeah, do you agree?
I think, and I love Mean Girls. I mean, I think like that Mean Girls is like, you know, I think no matter how old you are, there are still in my groups of friends, because it's a wide age group of people we hang out with from like their mid-20s to late 30s.
Yeah, and it's for everybody.
that movie is still heavily quoted within our group a lot.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need any kind of inspiration for it to happen. It's almost like second nature for some people to like bring it up. And I guess that would give like it's a slighter edge because like a lot of our friends are quoting Heathers, right? But
that's right. But there are so many great one-liners from Heathers that should be quoted. I don't know why they're not like
a lot.
Heather says to another, it's Heather Duke that has like, I don't know, and forgive me, I don't know if it's anorexia or if it's bulimia, but where she like induces vomiting.
Yeah.
There's a scene where I think it's after Heather Chandler dies and Heather Duke is eating like a chicken drumstick in the gym.
Oh yeah.
And someone goes, "Come on, Heather, where's your urge to purge?" Like that is fucking hilarious. Like, why do people not quote that more? There's like a million of those throughout the movie. But you're right. Mean Girls is definitely more of a cultural phenomenon, and it's still like it gets referenced at work. Like to me, like it happened on Valentine's Day, fell on a Wednesday this year. I was wearing a pink shirt just to be festive, and we were talking about on Wednesdays we wear pink. Like still comes up in so many different social circles. You're right.
Yep. You're right. And I think I think it's because of when Mean Girls came out compared to when this came out. I think even in 2004. It would be hard to make something as mean-spirited as this without being like, okay, guys, you have to like throw in like this is the moral of the story. It can't all be like completely snarky and evil. So I think because of a product of when Mean Girls comes out, it can't really go as completely full, like full bitchy without it has to show the consequences of everyone's behavior. Like
exactly.
Katie has to learn that like, hey, like who she once was is who she is, and like all this other stuff like that's in that movie. In 1989, I don't think they really, at this point they're like there weren't movies like this, so they're like, hey, let's go full out and not have and I agree with you. There is a little bit of that message by the end of.
But it doesn't feel as bold and like clear
as heavy-handed either.
As it comes in Mean Girls for sure.
Yeah. So the fact that it maintained this mean streak throughout, and I was surprised to learn because I guess in the original script, JD actually did blow up the high school. And
that would not have flown with ratings boards, I'm imagining.
Yeah, he blows up the high school, and then there's like this kind of like surreal kind of prom-esque heaven sequence where everyone's there.
Yes, and Martha has a moment to shine, right? Yeah.
That was the original darker ending, but New World Pictures, if they said if we get to distribute this movie, you have to change the ending because that's too dark. Like you have that we can't murder the entire like high school class.
It's not that I don't like the ending of Heather's, but like hearing this alternate ending that was in the original script would have really elevated this movie if they had shot it that way. Yeah, sure, it would have been dark, but like that
it feels more in line with what the movie is.
Like, this is a Hollywoodized ending for sure. Like Heather or Veronica gets there in time to sabotage JD's plans, and she comes out as the morally grounded hero of the story, and like it ends in the typical 80s like Hollywood ending, but for definitely a different sort of movie. But you can tell it's concocted from the minds of studio execs and ratings boards rather than the screenwriter.
Yeah, but I was like, that ending would have been. I mean, it is dark, but it would have. And actually, it's dark. Right? Yeah, it's dark, but having the whole like surreal kind of prom like heaven sequence kind of would have maybe softened that a little bit. Like, oh, like this is where things were meant to go. I kind of wish they would have kept that ending because it would have called back to an earlier moment in the movie where somebody says the only place that in society where all these different social groups can be together is in heaven, right? That's what JD says, like before the name of the bomb. Yeah, so I think that would have worked a lot better. I understand their unease,
I get it too. Yeah.
But I guess it also, even despite the ending that we get, it is still kind of dark in the sense that Veronica is our hero, I guess. She still committed murder. I guess there's also that,
right?
And she doesn't
at least manslaughter.
And she doesn't get caught. So there's that part of the story too. That when the credits roll for this, I was like, we're rooting for someone that still did horrible things, but I mean, also it's the nature of the movie. So I was like, you want her to not get caught.
We're definitely on her side for sure.
Right.
And we feel
especially compared to JD.
That's a great point. There's a bigger antagonist at play. And you also feel like as the audience, we are made to, I believe, at least I felt this way. The negative acts that Veronica's character portrays or puts out, we feel as an audience, that's kind of like what we want. We're not on the Heather's side. We don't want to see them here. If maybe we wouldn't have conspired to kill them, but now that they're gone, it's kind of like that's a net good for the characters in this movie.
Yep. And I think you get a sense of that as an audience member when it's going back and forth from her writing the diary entry or journal entry. And it's going back and forth from that party she goes to with Heather Chandler, where that guy's trying to sleep with her, and she's like, she feels sick and she wants to leave, and Heather's like, no, we're not leaving. And then she like throws up, and like, yeah, you're seeing all the reasons why, like, oh, like I would hate her too.
Yeah,
she's
exactly.
as she's going back and forth writing it, like her inner thoughts about wouldn't life be better without them. So like, yes, like you said, none of us would go, to the lengths of wanting to kill.
Hopefully,
I hope not. But in the sense of in the space of movie land and in this movie, they make you understand Veronica's motivations, I guess, like enough for you don't completely hate her too, because it's like. Because you have to, because like it's one of those things where there's like the moral ambiguity is like very like one person is clearly evil or more so, and I think also what makes Veronica different from JD, of course, is that she eventually does get some kind of moral compass. Like this is wrong. She actually has it a few times, even after they do each one, where she's kind of like.
Even before Heather Chandler, she's like, this is not as far as I want to take this as much as like, this is kind of like, I would like this to happen, but you're being, you're going over the edge here. Like, she feels very much like a passenger in the plan the whole way through.
Like, I love when I love because they're doing like these very adult things, right? But I love after the two jocks, they kill the two jocks, and there's this argument in the car, and it's such a childish argument about like where she's like yelling at him, and they're going back and forth with each other.
Yes.
And like, and that actually brings that down to a more human moment for her, where it's like, at the end of the day, she's still in high school. She's a teenager. They did these truly awful things, but like once you think about them and reminisce on them, I'm glad that they actually showed that part. That's why I like when there's like some kind of human moment in satire too, because it kind of can play like both sides of it, and I think they do that with her and her reactions to each thing that they do.
I think too, in an alternate universe where like, say by the end of the movie, if Veronica were to like be put on trial for these crimes, I think a good lawyer would be able to get her off, and here's why. Because in the first scene, and this kind of actually helps to break down the deaths in order. So in the first death scene, Heather Chandler, they're trying not really break, but they kind of oddly just enter her house on a Saturday morning, just kind of like they belong there, and they're trying to get back at her and think of something to help make her like throw up as like revenge for the party scene, like you mentioned earlier. And Veronica is just trying to make some concoction with stuff in the fridge, and JD goes down under the sink and is pulling out these toxic chemicals and makes a concoction in a glass. And we see she's looking at JD when she grabs the glass that she thinks is like the milk and orange juice combo. Yeah. And I think it was JD also that gives Heather the drink. Yeah. And Heather takes it herself. So like Veronica didn't exactly hand or set it up for her to die. It just kind of like was, a miscommunication, if you will. Yeah. And then there's another great moment in the screenplay that I wanted to bring up that leads to the deaths of the two jocks whose names I cannot remember at the moment. But there's a scene where they're kind of concocting
Kurt and Ram. There we go.
And what's the second one?
Kurt and Ram.
Ram?
Two jocks. Yeah.
Okay. I knew it was an R. So after the Kurt and Ram date goes sideways and she's looking for revenge on what those guys said that happened on this date that didn't. There's a scene like where they're kind of hatching a revenge plan for those two. And JD asks her, and it kind of seems like it comes out of nowhere, but he goes, "Do you take German in school?" And she goes, "No, I take French." And then he comes up with this thing about how his grandfather in World War II snuck out these like dummy bullets that like would penetrate the skin, but that just are a tranquilizer and don't actually kill somebody. And that's what they use to shoot the jocks with in the prank. And I didn't notice this after, but the slick part of the screenplay that I'm getting at here is the words that he calls these bullets from Germany are German for "I'm lying," which kind of sets up that she's being manipulated and actually thinks that these wouldn't kill them, even though she does fire the gun at one of them. I don't think she knows that it's going to kill Ram or whatever jock she ends up shooting. So anyway, back to the point is I think she's not as complicit in the murders as the movie even makes her out to seem. Like she's definitely under the thumb of JD.
You might be right, because there's that initial accident. So like she does the countdown where she's like the 3, 2, 1 countdown when they're doing setting up for whatever happens to them, right? And then JD comes out and shoots one of them.
Right.
He falls down, and it seems the way that she's reacting. At first, you're looking at it like, oh, and she fires her gun, and he runs away.
Right.
And at first, you're thinking like she's laughing as a sadistic thing, or is she laughing because she still thinks this is a joke that won't end with them like completely like dying? Because the way she reacts to the guy's body on the ground, it's almost a surreal like. She almost said something like he doesn't look too good. She's almost like she's surprised,
like nervous laughter. Okay.
Yeah. So like that makes a lot of sense. Like maybe she isn't as complicit in the things they're having, and JD's the mastermind.
On this watch, anyway, I more felt like she was more being manipulated by JD than being complicit with the murders. Even though she does say it multiple times, this is kind of what she wants for these characters. I don't know that there's evidence that would really commit her to actually doing them, you know what I mean? But it'd be great, make for good analysis. And then JD, of course, has nothing to do really with his. I mean, she does almost kill him, but he definitely survives quite a bit before inevitably, going up in flames.
Yeah. God, what was that line? They said that they were sword fighting in your mouth. I was like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that was oh boy. Yeah, it definitely doesn't hold back the dialogue
at all. Speaking of like some of the things in the movie, I guess that scene in particular, because I was trying to think of because I don't know what the social climate was when they made this, as far as like setting up a joke where these two jocks, they're making a suicide pact, not a real one, of course, like, but that's what they're using as like, setting up a suicide pact between these two jocks who were secretly lovers, and being that they would be so ashamed of like being gay and getting caught, that's why they do this, right? I just wondering like. Because it's funny here, like even though it's so like wow, that's like very outlandish and so offensive. But again, it's satire, so it's funny,
right?
But I was like, dude, I wonder what it was like them seeing that for the first time, being like, oh, like is that too far, or like
that's a great question. And I found myself while watching this movie thinking like, I wish I could have watched this in the context of the 80s. Like I think so many things would just hit so much differently than they do now, knowing what we know and like how society has just progressed since 89. Some things are clear. I do think though that scenario and how the death of those jocks is handled, especially like with one of their fathers at the funeral, and how he proudly proclaims to the audience, he goes, "My son was gay and I loved him anyway," or whatever.
Yeah, he's like, "I love my gay son."
Yes, like very much parody, right? However, I do feel like there's a sense that scene is more ahead of its time, because from what I gather, I don't imagine that what we know now about like the closeted male's experience was quite so out there in 89 as it is in like, the 2000s. So I did see some comments afterwards and some videos about how that scene has aged, not poorly, but like it's kind of come to light that it was actually more accurate than the screenwriter intended at the time. Although it is, made in a parody, satirical sort of sense, but kind of closer to true life than I guess he would have thought at the time. But
I thought that was such. I too agree with you. I wish I could have seen it in like that.
It would have been so much different, I'm sure. But
wondering like what the audience really thought about it, and like I mean, of course, like the way critics reviewed it then, like I wanted to know what they like. There's a little bit of what they thought about it then, but a lot of the reviews I found were like retroactive, like in the years since.
Exactly. I didn't see any initial reactions either,
and very much praising. I mean, he has a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. Like it's very much praised as like a pinnacle of the teen movie.
And
probably because it's the anti-teen movie. It's not. It doesn't play things really sweet. I was also dying laughing at the funeral for Heather Chandler, and all those people praying over
the inner monologues.
Yes,
I was about to bring that up. Actually, that was a great scene.
So funny. Like the one jock that's going back and forth. Like
I think that's Ram.
Like, why would you kill such a fine piece of snatch? And I was just Jesus. Dude.
And then he's having a conversation with himself. He goes, "I'm so sensitive these days."
And he's like, after he says the joke, he's like, "Oh, I hope you know that was a joke. That was a joke." And like he's like talking to God that way. I thought that was funny. And then the one kid that like is praying for her, then also prays that he gets into Harvard, and like completely like
Yeah.
negates her. Yeah, I thought that whole sequence was really funny. And then Heather Dukes is also hilarious too. Like you just get an eye on like who these people really are.
Definitely.
during that moment. That's like probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I was dying.
Yeah, me too. Definitely a standout scene. Another thing that I love, and it's present all throughout the movie, and I can't remember what movie we just covered where this was the same thing was going on, but the color contrast and the wardrobe I think it's most poignant with Veronica and Heather Chandler. Heather Chandler is always clad in red, even like belongings in her house, her room, the carpet that she falls on when she dies, it looks like a big blood-soaked red carpet. She's always the red polo ball. All her outfits are red, and Veronica is almost exclusively has blue in her wardrobe, and it's just great color contrast that I just am curious, like what. Clearly, I don't know if it was a directing choice or if it was a screenplay choice, but I'd be curious to know the motivation behind why because they're both primary colors, and then JD is always clad in black too, which is kind of he's like the standout. But I always love those color details are always something that is a standout to me, and it's so consistent in this movie more so than any other.
Yeah, I agree. It actually makes like the characters stand out a bit more, and like their personality traits stand out a bit more. Like I think, and like the choices for Veronica's wardrobe, it kind of keeps her on like the fringes a bit. Like she's not quite them,
right?
And and also she's not quite JD either, but like she could easily flip. It's like
exactly.
She's somewhere in the middle, and it kind of gets explained a lot too when like her and Heather kind of get in that argument where it's like she essentially says that she almost like basically made her. And like she wouldn't be popular at all
without me.
Without me, like they wouldn't be popular at all. Like so, like she was always on the cusp, I think, and like never quite. I mean, she's the only one not named Heather, so
Which there's another example that I had written down, but I was desperately wanting to bring up. I don't know if you ever watched the show Recess growing up.
Yep.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah.
Didn't occur to me until after, but for those that know the show, there's a clique of girls called the Ashleys in that show. And there's one, Spinelli is the one that's not actually an Ashley. I think there's 3 or 4 of them, but yeah, definitely from Heather's. Like couldn't convince me otherwise, but I thought that was super funny. When I clued into that, I was like, that is so hilarious that a kid's cartoon that I grew up watching was definitely inspired by this in some way.
Yeah, I actually didn't think about that. Like, because I do remember that detail about the show. That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like everything.
And they're the cliquey girls that are always like,
yeah, that's funny.
But definitely funny. The very far-reaching influence from this movie.
Yeah, I agree. I was also thinking too, because also I was thinking about that song that they write for this movie, the teen suicide song that plays on the radio, which was written for the film.
Did not know that.
Yeah, it's pretty. What's that? Teenage suicide? Don't do it. I mean, it is
pretty on the nose.
Funny, kind of satirical kind of song. Of course, teen suicide is not funny at all whatsoever. So I'm wondering if you were showing this to young people today, and they're seeing it for the first time.
Yeah.
Do they see the satire and joke in it, or is it kind of like, hey, this is not at all funny? It is really interesting when certain things like, this is made in 89, right? Which is why you and I can watch it now and be like, hey, like this is funny for the time. And it actually is. And a lot of these jokes still work today because a lot of this is still like relevant today. It still like exists today. But if you were showing it to a teenager of today for the first time, would this go over well?
I do not know. Like the first thing as like a counter example to this that was a big popular piece of media that dealt with teenage suicide that I actually liked the first season of the show, but 13 Reasons Why. Such a different approach to teen suicide than Heather's is. It's not satirical at all. It actually takes itself quite seriously in the subject matter. And for the most part, at least in the first couple seasons, does a great job. But I feel like that is more resonant with young people today, like the nature of like 13 Reasons Why.
The seriousness of it.
Than Heather's would be. Like I actually think Heather's might, at least with today's audience, pose a risk of glorifying teenage suicide, like it clearly is poking fun of in the context of the 80s. I'm surprised when you mentioned that it has a 93 on Rotten Tomatoes. Like to myself, I don't know obviously when the most recent ratings were put up there, but if I were to guess, I would say that they're older scores because I just don't know that I see like a lot of like new people discovering this movie in this day and age, like enjoying it as much as we might. I could be wrong about that, but I'd be curious to see how, because the themes, of course, of Heather still resonate, but I'd be curious to know if people would enjoy it as much if you were to show teenagers now this movie that otherwise might never ever come across it. I think that'd be great. Great experience, like experiment to see how it would hold up with like teenagers of today, or at least the same target audience. Do you think, like, what do you think about how it might be received?
I don't know, man. Like, I'm glad you brought up 13 Reasons Why, because I actually watched that show too, and I only liked the first season because, of course, that was the only season based on something, and then
off the book, and I read the book too, and it was actually pretty faithful.
And so, because it was so popular, they of course milked it and gave you more seasons.
I even liked season 2, but I dipped out after like 3.
So, like, what I respected about that show, and I know it got a lot of flack for. They thought a lot of people that looked at it said that it glorified teen suicide, and then when I was watching it, I was like, I don't think it did. Now, their complaints were that it was using teen suicide as a plot device and almost use it as a sort of like murder mystery, like, find out why this kind of happened to her kind of thing. But I was like, okay, fine. Like, if you want to say that using it as a hook glorifies it, that's a little bit of a reach to me. But I was like, I still think the serious nature of it could be fairly understood by the teenage audience who is watching it. So that was well said. But do I think that teenagers of today are? I don't want to. Because I didn't want anyone insulting my intelligence when I was a teenager, and not saying that I wouldn't understand satire or
true. That's right.
So I would hope that they would understand that this is a joke, but since a lot of this I feel is even more of an issue today, would they think that joke is funny? I don't know. That is like a kind of where I'm at on that. I would hope so, because but I don't know if they would.
I also just I worry that there's so many like young people today that just would be so not on board with like movies like that are considered old, like, even though this is it's 35, but like I have like even some friends that like consider like pre-2000s old, or even like I've mentioned some movies that we cover that are 15 and like, oh, that's old. I'm like, yeah, that's not old, but I definitely have trouble believing that like young people today would watch a movie from the 80s about high school and like try to take the message seriously, or like trying to look beyond the surface of it. But I might just be not giving them enough credit, but that's just like my initial thoughts. Like, but if you were to find a group that were to actually try and watch it and sit through it and glean at what's under the surface, I just have a feeling that it wouldn't be as like well regarded, because I just feel like, and I could be wrong, I'm not in high school anymore, but there's just such an animosity towards like older content these days that I just feel like, but it really, it's sad, because that puts so many people off great pieces of content like really Heathers, like some of the best era of movie making, but
really does.
Oh well.
I gotta want to piggyback a little bit off what you said about like because it is considered an older movie and what that all means. I thought it was interesting. They said that Waters created a specific set of slang and style of speech for the film, wanting to ensure that the language of the movie would have a timeless quality instead of just reflecting teen slang at the time.
Okay.
And they said that the film is among the most cited in the Oxford English Dictionary as well.
No way.
And I was wondering, because like you said, there are things about it that feel of the time period. It feels, some of it does feel very 80s.
Yeah.
But I did think while watching it, in terms of the dialogue and how characters interacted with each other, a lot of it didn't feel specifically like 1989. I actually got the vibe that I could hear some of that today. And I think he mostly got that approach right. I think it does feel, at least in the dialogue and their interactions with each other, does feel a bit timeless and not so much in the 80s time capsule. And I was wondering what you thought about that.
There's a few moments more probably that I can bring to mind on the spot. I do feel like some of the interactions that do make it feel grounded in the 80s is the clearly satirical conversations that Veronica has with her parents. That seems like stereotypical, like this is what you'd expect, like the family dynamics from the 1980s. But on the opposite end of that, where I think there is more timeless quality to the dialogue between JD and his dad, where they sort of like talk to each other from the other's perspective, where like JD greets his dad as if he was his dad talking to his son, and his dad does the same thing. I thought that was super neat and like definitely adds like a timeless quality to their interaction. Like that doesn't seem like the way that people would, like a father-son would interact in the 1980s. Perhaps some might, I don't know. I thought it was a really quirky thing that kind of added to the relationship, even though it's not explored that much. Definitely some of like how the jocks talk to each other and about other people in the cafeteria scenes for sure. That seems very stereotypical 80s to me. But again, it's like a parody. Like that's what they're aiming for, but definitely grounds it in the decade, I think. And then the journaling of Veronica definitely feels like an 80s thing to me.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah.
I was just thinking when you're talking about her parents, when the mom walks in and thinks she's like hung herself, and she like goes off with this like almost emotional kind of like, oh, I should let you like get that job at the mall that one time, and then she like comes back to life and she's like, oh, and like the way that there's no reaction from like she's like, oh, and then like it's just like that whole exchange is just really funny and just
definitely
weird.
different. Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, I think a lot of it. I mean, I think some of it is kind of like the jock speak, especially. I mean, I know there's a lot of movies that make fun of that now.
Yeah,
and
jock speak. That's so funny.
It's certainly different now, but that means some of the stuff they were saying in the movie does feel like you can grab it from like any 80s film during that period, and that's how jocks were depicted. Pretty
very much so, and it does a great job of depicting them in this movie.
But I thought the girl dialogue was pretty much like it felt like I could hear that. Like I kept thinking of Mean Girls. Like it just felt like it was like just a different twist on some of their exchanges with each other. So I mean, for the most part, I think he got it mostly right. That it feels like it could be watched today and like it wouldn't feel like, at least dialogue wise, that it's an 80s movie.
I find it so impressive when a member of the opposite gender writes dialogue for the opposite gender and does it well, because this seems like, I mean, again, as a guy, seems like a genuine dialogue between ladies in a high school setting, but for it to be written by a man, I'm like, that is even more impressive. All the more similar. I always bring in like another good example. This is S.E. Hinton, who wrote The Outsiders. Such a great example of a woman writing male dialogue and even inner dialogue that is so representative of what it is actually like. So I always find that super, super impressive. And Heathers does that great because it's a female-centric, female-led movie written by a man, but like done really, really well. I think this movie, if it had to be remade, I would say make it female directed. And I think it would be a great, great addition.
So,
but
that's interesting too. Okay, so they Heathers was turned into like a musical for a little bit. There was a TV show that was going to be done by the original writer that was all set to go on the Paramount Network, but then there was a tragic school shooting around the time that it was going to come out, and they shelved it permanently because they were like they thought it would be in poor taste to do a high school, that kind of thing. And I thought about like, hey, I wonder, could they remake Heathers today? Or would it just be too similar to a new generation of Mean Girls and like they wouldn't get it? So I do kind of wonder like what that would look like, or if that would even be possible at this point. Could they do it?
I think it'd be cool to try, but how it would go down is anybody's guess.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, there's like some really good dialogue. Like I like the "Did you have a brain tumor for breakfast?" That's what Hannah Chandler has like a lot.
Yes, she does.
Like the really good line.
Relatively short screen time, she does have a lot of great one-liners.
Yeah, and then Winona Ryder has the reference to vomiting, the "lick it up, baby, lick it up." That's the way she says it is really like effective and good. I actually think out of I told you I love Edward Scissorhands and stuff. I actually think this might be my favorite thing that I've seen Winona Ryder in. And I know you haven't seen her a lot. Yeah, but like she is, and she's also really good. It's interesting watching her and knowing what she was like in Beetlejuice and seeing her here, because she plays like the anti-teenager in Beetlejuice, where she's just so sullen and goth and like she hates her parents and like she's just so emo.
Yeah.
And then she plays this version of like a teenager, which is completely different. So there's like you already see at that age like the range that she kind of had to go back and forth. But yeah, she's really fun here. Like she's really, like you can tell that like we said, like she really wanted the part, and you could tell once she got it that she wanted to prove that like this is why I wanted it so bad. So
yeah. Well, coincidentally enough, while I don't know at what stage the screenplay was at when she had received it, but I guess very around the same time, a girl from Winona Ryder's high school actually did commit suicide, which kind of emboldened her to approach this screenplay. And I saw a little bit of an interview with her where she was describing how sickened she was with the kind of fake outpouring of grief for this girl by people who did not associate with her. And that is very much a big theme in this movie.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of galvanized her to work in this movie, which I think comes across in her performance because she's very committed. You totally buy her as who she really is as a character. And I think it's really clear she, and she does, that all notwithstanding, she just does a genuinely great job in the role too.
And by the way, you do kind of see, I even saw this in high school where not necessarily like suicide, but where it was like something tragic might happen to a fellow student. And there are people who have genuine empathy and they're like, oh, I feel so bad. But I also saw the other side of that where it felt like other people who were trying to be empathetic were simply being empathetic to jump on the bandwagon of being empathetic for attention. And that is something that can happen when there's like some kind of tragedy, especially amongst young people. I mean, I think like that. And I think that's the reason why it's so easy to be made fun of here, because it can really happen. Like it can be really, it becomes another thing to like kind of you ride the coattails of like that experience. There is like I guess a recent like real life example. There was a kid who met a girl online. They were basically like, well, he met her in person before. They were teenagers and they had met once, but they had this like online relationship where they were constantly talking with each other. And he had told her about how he wanted to kill himself. And then eventually she encouraged him to do it. And he did.
Yes. This rings a bell, actually.
And that was the whole case of like, it was the first one of those cases where it was like, hey, can you charge with someone with like murder if they weren't there? If there was no like her words were like the weapon, basically, right?
Right.
And her reasons for and that they learned from like her just talking to her friends and all the stuff that they found in her texts and writings. She wanted attention for losing her high school boyfriend, and that is a serious instance of like that happening. But I think that's watching it be made fun of here. It's like this is not too far off from like how
100%.
These things kind of happen.
It's like just exploitative fundamentally. Yeah.
Right. Like you even see in this scene where like it's the news coverage and like and I love when like Heather Duke's on like 2 different channels.
Yeah.
And she's like, did you talk to like every news outlet?
Yeah.
And
how many did you run to? Yeah.
And then that one girl is saying how much like she misses her or like whatever, and like Veronica was like, they didn't even like each other. Like, what are you talking about?
That scene where they're watching the coverage is actually hilarious.
Yeah. So like you see it there too, and I think that like I said, through that satire, and even though it's funny, you do kind of see like this can be like a product of like human nature too, where it's like, some people do ride the coattails of tragedy just for attention.
Yeah.
And it's not a good thing at all, but it does happen. And I like that the movie makes fun of it. I also like that in their attempts to kind of get rid of, like when they want to get rid of Heather Chandler, and you would think like that. I think they kind of thought like in death, people would be really honest about how they felt about her. And it was the opposite. They like, she became more popular after she died. And I love that they played that angle up too. Like,
same.
And in the sense with the 2 jocks, it was like, this big secret came out, but then you have the dad, like, who is like very much like, I wish I would have known you were pansy. I would have loved you anyway. That kind of thing. Like, even though the dialogue is harsh, he's like, he still would have loved his gay son. So like, even that isn't like, doesn't have the effect that they, intended.
Right.
So I love how it kind of flips all those things on
just
its head a bit.
Part of a really smart screenplay.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And so where do you think this kind of like, so I actually don't know I've exposed you to some of these teen things from my era and stuff, but I don't know how many other like teen films from any era that you've actually like seen. But like, where did this kind of like stack up for you compared to most of them?
Oh, I mean, of the ones that we've like specifically covered on the show, I'd put it near the top. Of all the other ones, like there's probably some other great examples that we haven't covered. Like I'd put it like maybe like around, I think I like it probably as much as I liked Cruel Intentions, but for different reasons. Like I don't like it quite as much as I'd like I love Dazed and Confused.
Right.
As a teen movie, I love The Breakfast Club. I would put this somewhere in between like The Breakfast Club and Cruel Intentions. Somewhere like there. So I have a high regard for this movie for sure, but I'd have to like maybe stack it up across some more examples that I could think of off the top of my head. But of the teen movie era, and this is kind of feels, it's of a different era than some of the other ones that we've covered. But definitely for all intents and purposes, like one of my, I guess I could say, yeah, one of my favorites of the genre, probably overall.
Yeah, probably mine too. It's ahead of its time in a lot of ways. I think that's
ahead of its time, very much so. Yeah,
I think it's the reason why it really works. And it's ahead of its time. It still speaks on a lot of the experiences that young people are going through today. And that's what, it's funny because he wanted to write like the anti John Hughes movie. And like what I've always felt about those John Hughes movies is that those are timeless. Like I watched The Breakfast Club, and even though it's a 80s movie, I watch it in today's lens perfectly, where like a lot of the stuff that's in that works still today. And a lot of John Hughes movies were like that, where it didn't really felt like it was like trapped in the 80s. Right. And I know we've talked about whether anyone can watch Heathers today. I think Heathers has that timeless quality where it doesn't feel stuck in its time. It feels, just because the themes feel very topical too.
Right.
And that is why
this other side of the spectrum
continues to work.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a hell of a smart movie. Like probably a lot smarter than it has any right to be.
100%.
And some other little fun facts to throw you. Brad Pitt read for JD, but
he was rejected. Man, he would have been great too. I love that it went to
Christian Slater.
Christian Slater, but I think Brad Pitt would have killed this too.
It's interesting too, and actually a fun little thing. Brad Pitt ends up in an interview with the vampire, and it was Christian Slater.
Yeah.
So
a few years later.
A few years later, Christian Slater said that he threw a big tantrum and tossed a script in the trash after he assumed he bombed his audition, but they really liked him. And he was signed on to play JD shortly after Ryder was cast, and he said that he channeled Jack Nicholson for the role, and I guess I can kind of see a little bit of that.
JD. Is there another role of Jack Nicholson you think that he was inspired by? Because I know that he wrote Jack Nicholson, but didn't he get a reply, I guess, at the time. So I thought I was like, I don't know what Jack Nicholson I think he's trying to channel, or if it's just like.
I think that's funny. Like, before that time, I was like, would it be One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? I don't know. I was like trying to think of what role he does. He does seem to have mannerisms in his performance that seem similar.
Is it like
Jack
Shining? The Shining Jack Nicholson?
It could be actually, because he does get more unhinged,
progressively unhinged.
As the movie goes on, it's clear that he's crazy. Which I thought was interesting too. Heather Graham actually was offered the part of Heather Chandler. Heather Graham, as we know, she went on to be in like Boogie Nights, became like a big actress in the time in her own right. But she had to turn it down because her parents disapproved of the script as well.
No surprise there.
And interesting about Shannen Doherty, she was more interested in playing Heather Chandler, but they thought she was really good at playing Heather Duke. So she got that part. But I do think it's interesting because I know I mentioned it earlier. They said that she ran out of a screening of the movie because when she realized it was a dark comedy and not a drama, she was upset by the finished product. And I just don't know how you could be filming what you were filming and not see that this was clearly like comedy and satire.
I wonder because even her stuff script or something.
Well, even her stuff feels like it's not serious. Like she has some stuff that's clearly funny, but I don't know.
I did read that she had a very conservative upbringing, so I'm wondering if that would have contributed to her. Like maybe she was just naive and not privy to how the social atmosphere really worked in a high school. Because I know that she had trouble delivering some of the more heinous dialogue that her character has. So I'm thinking that has something to do with it. But I get you. It's like, how are you not aware of the intentions in the movie? But I think that has something to do with it, if I were to guess.
Because I think she's the one that says, "Get off my dick," or something like.
Are you pulling my dick? Yeah. Apparently, that was a line that she struggled to deliver, which is hilarious. Yeah.
And it's so funny because Shannen Doherty down the road becomes like the bad girl of TV. Like she's Brenda Walsh on Now 2-0, and she was. Now we know kind of what happened back then. There was a lot of things that were going on in her life, but at the time she was fired from Now 2-0 because she was wasn't getting along with the rest of the cast allegedly, and she was the one that was causing the most problems allegedly. And then she gets on Charmed, and there's a similar problem on Charmed with Alyssa Milano, and like, so it's so funny that she had this kind of, and then she has this rep later for being like the bad girl of television, which has since gone away. Now she's fought a brave fight with battle with cancer, and like she is still living and thriving, and has become a big spokesperson for that. And she has a podcast now where she actually goes back and revisits like now too Charmed stuff she's worked on. Also talks about her her road with cancer, and interviews different celebrities from her era as well. So I think she's kind of like embraced all aspects of her career now, which when you get older, a lot changes, and I think you think of it all a bit differently.
Yeah, 100%.
Down the road. And although the movie is set in Ohio, it was filmed entirely in Los Angeles. Corvallis High School in Studio City. That is now British Academy in Studio City. Rodrigo Hills High School is another place they shot, and John Adams Middle School also in Santa Monica. So there were a lot of different locations for the school. The funeral scenes were filmed at Church of Angels in Pasadena, where there was also scenes for the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie filmed there, and Just Married. As well. So that it's interesting how they get fake LA for or LA get fake for Ohio. I'm watching it though, because I know those areas. You do very much see that it. At least watching for me, I was like, that feels. Even then, I was like, that looks like LA. But
okay, I guess most of it shot inside, so that kind of would obscure where the location. I know there's obviously the wood sequence, which I wouldn't have guessed LA would have many dense foliage, but I thought it was convincing. You couldn't have told me. I wouldn't have known where this was shot at all.
Yeah,
pretty neat though.
There is a 4K of this movie. I didn't know that till today, so I need to get it because I have like an old copy of this. So
I have an old DVD.
I would like to get that on 4K as well. The initial reviews, Washington Post said it might be the nastiest, cruelest fun you can have without actually having to study law or guard leather products. If movies were food, Heathers would be a cynic's chocolate binge. And Roger Ebert gave it 2.5 out of 4 stars. And he said, Heathers is a morbid comedy about peer pressure in high school, about teenage suicide, and about the deadliness of cliques that not only exclude, but also maim and kill. He says, while conceding its ability to provoke thought and shock, Ebert questioned how the mixed sensibility as a dark murder comedy and cynical morality play led to the difficulty of the audience understanding the film's point of view.
Okay.
Interesting. I thought at least he didn't hate it.
Yeah, no, it seems like he liked but didn't love.
And it is widely considered by many critics today to be the best teen movie ever made.
Okay.
I think, I mean, you can go across
high praise.
Outlet.
Yeah,
you can go across any outlet. Everyone's gonna have a different one at the top of their list. But I'm not. I don't think
love to see the praise for it though.
Yeah. And then academics today have likened Heathers to other films popular during the 80s and early 90s, which characterized domestic youth narrative as well. And they also listed Jawbreaker as a huge inspiration, like we mentioned earlier, and Mean Girls. I would be interested to put up a poll actually to see what people like more, Heathers or Mean Girls. And I know it's going to be a generational thing when they vote, probably.
For sure. Yeah. I feel like it'll skew Mean Girls, but probably because more people have seen it.
Yeah. I guess this is the time when we
give
our scores.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
Well, I guess I'll go because I have my mind made up. Like, to me, Letterboxd scoring, I think I give this a 3.5 out of 5. Like, I think it's, like you said, timeless, very, very darkly humorous, which I always appreciate. It's a really, really well thought out, methodical satire, which, definitely pulls at my cinema heartstrings, I guess, if you will. Very solid cast performances, slick screenplay, smarter than you might think at first glance, and it held up great on rewatch, so I couldn't ask for more than that. Yeah, really, really like it, and it probably put a few years between rewatch, but I am excited to check it out again down the road. Very excited to see Mean Girls again and look for the inspirations, and I'm just looking forward to like watching future teen movies and just see if they borrow from Heathers.
Yeah, I think what's going to be interesting now, like whatever ones we cover moving forward, that might be in your head now, like how much any of them might have been inspired by it. I would be curious actually because I haven't to watch this with a girl because I've seen Mean Girls with a bunch of girls and like they are like spot on. This is in our hearts, kind of thing.
Right.
And I would be interested to see like what a girl would think about it, to kind of get their perspective on it too. But I give it 4.
Okay, nice.
And I think it's because the rewatch felt like a new watch because I hadn't watched it in so long.
Right.
And it felt very fresh and new and just really funny to me. And like you said, it's a really smart script. It's ahead of its time in many ways, like we said already. The performances are spot on. Yeah, I mean, if anyone's wanting to see where a lot of some of these future stars kind of emerge, they emerge right here. So that if you're interested to see where Winona Ryder kind of broke out, even though she had Beetlejuice, this was another big role for her, and Christian Slater as well. It's really cool to see like where like this talent was kind of fostered and like where it went afterwards. And oddly enough, Daniel Waters as a writer, and hasn't really done. I mean, he's done other stuff, but nothing that stood up like this. And he was a co-writer on Batman Returns, which I thought I didn't know that till today. But that movie went through like a lot of script changes, and if we ever have to cover that movie, it's a hodgepodge of stuff that kind of happened while they were making it. But yeah, essentially when some people write like one really great movie, and then I don't know what happens.
I know. There's probably countless examples of that happening. I always find it so interesting. Like, some people just got that $1 million idea, and that's all there is in the tank. But glad it got made.
Yeah, I am too, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think we both highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it. And it was good to do a anniversary. I know we've done a lot of teen movies for our anniversaries, but it was good to do one that wasn't from the 90s. However, we are recording one from the 90s tomorrow. But it'll be interesting to like have this fresh in our minds, and then watching that, because I'm probably going to watch 10 Things tomorrow just because it's just fresh in my brain. Having this in our mind and then looking at that is kind of see if there's any similarities there too. But yeah,
definitely looking forward to that watch. Without further ado, I think that's everything we had. Fantastic. Well, guys, if you are still here, thank you very much for joining us on another episode of Back to the Blockbuster. If you liked what you heard today, please check us out anywhere you guys get your podcast. We got 160 other episodes for you guys to binge and check out. As always, Gaius, always a pleasure. And guys, tune in. Later in the week, we will have our episode about AI dropping this week, and we also will be with guest Mark J. Parker, where we break down 10 Things I Hate About You. Lots more content coming your guys' way. And again, check us out anywhere on Facebook or where you get your podcasts at Back to the Blockbuster. And we will see you next time. Gaius, as always, my friend, take care, and we'll see you tomorrow.